Good morning. My name is Wendy Klein. I am the support specialist at the Autism Society of Greater Akron. And today we're going to visit a topic about AAC, Augmentative and Alternative Communication. I have with me two speech therapists from Summit DD that I would like to introduce, Peggy Roll and Lorraine Hardenbrook. We're going to start out with some very basic questions about AAC. What does it mean to be nonverbal? So you as families can decide whether or not this is the next step in attempting to teach your child to speak and understand language. So to you both, tell me exactly what is AAC?
Augmentative and alternative communication, I apologize. Which is just a broad term that encompasses a supplemental or replacement of your written or spoken language to help assist with individuals who are nonverbal or those who struggle with articulation and intelligibility.
Okay. In early 2023, the CDC came out and not only told us that 1 in 36 children have autism, but that about 35% of them are nonverbal. Are you seeing an increase of that in your work at Summit DD?
You know, Lorraine and I in our capacity serve adults.
Okay.
So we don't necessarily we wouldn't see that trend among children. Okay. So I'm not sure that we have a great data
Are there
point
more
for you.
adults coming for your services now?
I would say that we've had an increase, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think once they see, the work in action from other individuals, they're at least willing to explore those options, with adults who maybe have tried it in the past and it wasn't successful, but maybe now they're a little bit more ready and things like that. So
okay.
I do. And there's 2 of us now, so we have a little bit
Your
more.
volume is a little bit.
Yeah. Services.
So what are the precursors to AAC? What can a family try before they come to you and ask if a device is what might be needed?
Yeah.
We, in the AAC world, you will often hear people say that there are no prerequisites to AAC. In the past, people often followed what was called a candidacy model. You had to show certain skills, certain abilities before you could try AAC. We don't follow that model anymore, and it's really up to the family and the individual about whether they feel their communication is functional without that extra support. So if you come to a point where you're saying, my child, my loved one, the person that I'm supporting is not communicating functionally with their speech, their natural speech, they need something else. I think that is the point where you begin to explore AAC. AAC doesn't have to be a total replacement for your speech. It is alternative and augmentative, so that augmentative piece means it can add to what already exists.
Could you define functional communication?
Sure. It's really about, is that person able to, first and foremost, get their wants and needs met? Are they able to participate fully in their environment? I think it's important to consider what we define as functional, as considering all the functions of communication. We communicate to make requests, get our wants and needs met. We communicate to connect with people, share interactions, especially with our loved ones. We communicate to make comments about what's going on, just make observations, really important. In developing the skills to express what's happening in your environment, right? If I can, make notice of what's going on and connect with you about it, then I'm building some ability to tell about my day, to say what's going on. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
okay.
It does perfectly. So would you recommend toddlerhood or school age or young adult? What is a good time to start investigating, and who would be that person to assess your loved one? for AAC?
I think with speech and language in general, early intervention is, the best practice. So those people that you're working with in that early intervention piece would help guide some of those conversations as to whether they think that this would be a great time to explore AAC or not. That being said, if they haven't explored it by toddlerhood or even adulthood or even middle school age, it's always a topic of conversation that you should be willing to consider, because communication is an important, we would not be here if communication was not an utmost important skill for all of our individuals, and being able to communicate and participate in their environment as much as they can.
So tell me about some of the forms of AAC that are out there to choose from.
So, like I said, it's an umbrella term. There's quite a few different levels. So like the first level would be no tech, and that's what we kind of use. We're using our verbalizations, we're using gestures, facial expressions to help communicate in addition to what we're saying. Then there's low tech, or they call it light tech now, where it might be more like a communication board where they're pointing and there's pictures, but it doesn't really do anything. You have to have someone interacting with you or paying attention to what you're doing to get that need met. So, communication boards, you might hear of the word PECS, which is Picture Exchange Communication System. I mean, there is like a hierarchy to using that. It's a little bit different than just picture cards, which are also a low tech or a light tech type of communication. A lot of it is like programmed, or it might be general, or you're using pictures that are preferred of that individual. So you do have to kind of tailor it a little bit. And then the next one would be mid-tech, where it is a device of some kind that requires a battery or a plug to plug in. It has like a static display is what they call it, where it has pictures, and when you push it, something happens or something is said, but it doesn't really change much. It is what it is. It doesn't change as you hit the button, other than it says a word. You do need to program it. You need to make sure the pictures are, phrases or things that they, want to communicate to their individual or their families or whatever. There's also, programming the actual digitized speech where you're recording it on there. There's a number of different things. There's one button communicators, so if you need somebody to say hello to you when you walk in, that's one way of AAC you could use. But there's other ones that have 1 to like 30 buttons, where there's a lot more phrases on there that they've used in a variety of settings. Some of them also have like levels where you can contextualize it based on what you're doing. So,
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, each year technology, really has a lot of cool advances, and we're seeing that too, like the things that are available for individuals. So even if you're not sure about like a higher tech communication device, there's always something that we can always do to supplement or help your communication be a little bit better. And then the ones that you probably think of as AAC are higher tech, where it's either an iPad or a dedicated communication device that has a language system built into it, where you're using it more. There's a lot more things to say in there than just the pre-programmed phrases, I guess. You can make sentences, it's more language based, we're promoting learning language, and that's those systems that have that available. Other things about a high-tech device is it's a dynamic screen, so when you touch it, it does something. It either says, or it goes to another page. It goes to, if you hit food, it goes to the food page, and then there's other buttons, with all the different things that they might want to
A little bit more advanced.
Yes, much more. And it's leveled too, like there's smaller vocabularies versus bigger ones based on, your individual's skill level. It has digitized speech, or synthesized, I can't remember. synthesized, I'm sorry, I always get those two confused. Synthesized, which is like a computer generated voices, but again, they've made a lot of improvements in those so they don't sound so robotic over the years. So yes.
What would you say to a family who says, well, I have an iPad at home, I'm just gonna download this software, and I don't have to put the money into it, and I don't have to go to these sessions, and I can just do all this at home. What would you say to that?
You know, I think that's a really good question, and I certainly think that iPads have really opened up access for a lot of people. It's a lot more affordable than it used to be to go and get a dedicated device. And I quite honestly would never discourage someone from trying to get their child or loved one. This is not always about, you know, it could be just someone that you have in your life, access to communication. However, an AAC device in any form is not a silver bullet, it's not magic. And people are gonna do best and hopefully thrive with the support of a professional who knows how language develops and how language development interfaces with technology. And I would really encourage people to seek the support of an SLP, and not just SLPs. You know, sometimes it's about access issues. I've had an individual on my caseload recently who we trialed an iPad, and I left it with his care providers, and they gave me some feedback, and they said he's really not using it. And so I said, let's figure out what's going on. I went and observed him. It was at lunchtime, and it's a busy environment, lots of people around. They served him his lunch. And I watched him, and he was touching the screen and sliding his finger across it like this. And it wasn't activating the voice. So I went over to see what he was touching, and he was asking for water. He was touching water, sliding his finger across, and it wasn't activating the voice. So it wasn't so much, you know, and they were, the care providers were busy. They didn't hear the voice output and assumed that he wasn't using it. And what it really came down to is we needed to have a discussion about, can we change the settings on the iPad so that when he, you know, puts his finger down in that way, it activates? Or do we put something called a key guard on there that would prevent him from sliding? It would kind of force him to isolate his finger, pick it up and touch it. And then you'd get that voice output. I don't know that people, families who don't have that professional experience know to problem solve in that way. And having a professional on your team can help you find those things and make people more successful.
So what's involved time-wise once a parent has decided to go ahead and let's try this AAC at home and at school? What extracurricular time is there put into this so that they can get the kiddo up and running?
Well, I would say, you know, the time varies. It's hard to say like exactly what a time frame would be, because, you know, sometimes you introduce or you do an assessment where you're looking at, you know, the environment they're using it, the tasks that they need to be able to complete, like to communicate, or what they can't do now, what we need to help them with. When you look at all of those things, and then like access issues, so like Peggy said, the sliding, you might not notice that or even know that that's available, you know. So all of those things kind of go into that assessment piece, and they find a device or an iPad or whatever, and a program to trial. You know, typically if you're getting it through an insurance company, 30 to even 90 days, these insurance companies are requiring for a trial. So just having the piece of equipment and being able to, you know, interact with it, see how it's doing, gather some data to see if this is the most, the best fit for that individual. So, and then depending on which way you go, you know, getting the equipment, obviously, like Peggy said, an iPad is a little bit more accessible. I mean, you can find them in the store or Amazon or whatnot. Whereas if you go the route of a dedicated device through your insurance company, it might take a few months.
Yeah, right.
It really varies, like the time of the year, the insurance company, what device you're getting, have they had one before? You know, there's a lot of factors in that timing piece. But I think, like Peggy said, you want to look at all of those things and find the best piece of equipment that fits their needs and helps them communicate, so that you're not wasting time with a device that's not
Yes.
helpful to
Time
them.
well spent to do
Yeah.
this.
So are they expensive from no tech to high tech? Are they expensive devices?
They can be, yeah. I mean, your no tech obviously is what exists on your person, so that's free. The challenge is it's not necessarily universally understood. Not everyone knows the gestures that I do, or that a certain individual does. High-tech devices, depending on, you know, if you need an eye gaze system, can run in the thousands of dollars. I don't wanna give an exact dollar amount because
It really
Yeah.
depends on the device you get and like the access, the program, and all those extra features, which is determined in your assessment. So it's really hard to say. However, that money is well spent if you have an individual who can only access their device by looking at it, you know? So
So is there help out there? Are there free iPads? Are there assisted iPads financially that families can plug
There-
into?
there are some grant programs out there, I believe. Did we have links to those?
it's really dependent on like funding.
Yeah.
So I'm sure like certain individuals, I used to work in another county and their Down Syndrome Society would have periodically funds that you could write a letter to them to ask for, I know, an iPad, and they've done that in the past. So, I don't know of any specific ones, but we can always do that research if needed.
And for trial purposes, there are often the device companies, manufacturers will loan out a device. You usually have to have an SLP, you know, involved with that process. They most often won't, you know, allow families to just contact and say, I wanna borrow this. But if you're in that trial process, there are loaners out there available in iPad form or a dedicated device.
And I just talked to a family this morning that the child's IEP reflected that they needed an AAC device, and the school was lending him the device. So I know that schools might have a bank of them as well.
Yes, some, you know, schools, when the team has chosen to write into the IEP that a communication device is needed, the school is obligated to provide it, but it does belong to the school. So depending on the school district, some are more or less willing to send it home. But when the student is getting ready to exit and come to us in the adult world, it's really important to work with your team to figure out funding going forward, so that way that system continues with them in the adult world, because at exit, at graduation, whatever it is, that device still belongs to the school. It doesn't go with the individual.
Does an AAC device guarantee that that person will one day be verbal?
No.
No, I don't think it would guarantee that he's or she would be verbal, but it definitely helps the cause, because we know that modeling and exposure to language is the best way to learn language. And if you have a communication device that they're using for language, it's just another modeling tool for them. So.
Conversely, there is a lot of research that suggests AAC does not limit verbal communication. I know a lot of people, I've heard over the years, concerns about this is just gonna replace
He'll never
speech.
talk because
they're gonna use the device.
Right.
But there's a lot of research out there that shows that that's just not true. We just wanna get people functional communication, however that has to happen.
How can a parent get the school on board with this? If you are a school system who doesn't have a bank of AAC, and there's this little fellow or this little gal coming into class and they have an AAC device, how do you get your school to be on board with this with this new thing now?
I think it's tricky that it's gonna be so dependent upon, your school team, you know, and I think if the issue is that there's not, devices available, you know, there's lots of resources, and, AT Ohio in the state is a statewide program, for lending. I think they do require, if you are requesting an AAC device, that an SLP is involved. But there are also, you know, some county-specific lending libraries out there too. Some universities do have some lending libraries that you could try to access.
I have had parents come into classrooms with their children, and mom and dad and the child will stand at the front with this device, and they will explain why their child doesn't talk like a lot of you do, but they can still talk, and this is why. And it almost becomes a novelty in the classroom, and everybody, can I try it, can I use it, you know, it causes a lot of doors to open for that child, you know, in ways other than just a communicative device, you know, so I always like that. What if you're a bilingual family?
Yeah, a lot of the, like this is just a low-tech board, but this one is in Spanish. A lot of the devices have that option, you know, Spanish, French, Dutch, depending on where the device company is located, like their headquarters. So I know Dutch is one, so they have that available to, you know, be able to translate, and it can go back and forth from English to Spanish or whatever the languages you speak, to help maybe I don't speak Italian, but they do, and it would help me understand what he's trying to ask me, because you can flip back and forth.
Oh,
between the
nice.
two.
So if you had a child who was Spanish language dominant, you can do they could flip, the device can flip those, like being an
programs, yeah.
interpretive sort of, translational device.
Not necessarily, but like if he went to the food page, and a lot of them have pictures associated with it, so it does help whoever's working with them understand what it is they're asking for. But if they don't, they can go to the English version and find that word and say, oh, okay, you want, you know, lemonade or something.
They're often in the same location.
Interesting, okay. So if I had a child or a young adult, and we want to consider AAC as a possible option for communication, if you're associated with Summit DD, you would call you, right? We would call you.
Laureen and I serve adults.
Right, if you were an adult, yes.
Yes, you know, and school age, we are not necessarily serving right now. The idea is that your school system is serving you. There are, how many EISLPs are there now?
There's 4.
Wow, yeah. So I'm sure that would be,
And
you
who
know, a
are
great
they?
team.
I'm sorry, I
I
didn't
don't know their names. The EI,
so
early intervention.
Yes.
Yes, your early intervention team.
So if you were investigating, you know, augmentative and alternative communication as a, you know, birth to 3 or 5, I think it's 5 now, they could be a source of a resource. They might also already be working with them.
Okay.
And then your school team, and then once they, you know, graduate or turn 22, they become Peggy and I's, you know, that you would contact us to help with those questions.
So do you find, to wrap this up real quick, do you find that people who adopt an AAC device use them for their lifetime?
It really depends, depending on the like, a lot of people use communication device, not just individuals with disabilities, you know, people who've had strokes or a traumatic brain injury. They might need to use an augmentative communication device, you know, temporarily until whatever that is resolves. Otherwise, you know, it is a long-term solution. It's, or not a solution, but like an added measure to help them communicate. It really just depends.
Yeah, it's
very
case by
individual,
case.
specific.
Are there any disadvantages to it?
You know, I think that's something that should be part of your team discussion, as you're choosing if it's a device. You know, there, that that should be part of your assessment process. You know, there are often, people will ask me about, can we teach sign language, which is a form of no-tech AAC. And again, I'm never gonna discourage somebody from improving their communication. But something to consider is, are all the people in this person's life fluent in sign language? Are the people, when they go to Walmart on Saturday, which is a really enjoyable activity for them, does the cashier at Walmart know sign language? So, you know, if your answer to that is no, then that's a consideration that the team needs to make. If it's more important to that person and to that team supporting them that they don't have to manage anything, they don't have to wear a strap, they don't have to worry about programming, and they're not worried about this person being able to communicate with everyone they come across in their environment, then maybe that's the decision that the team makes. There's pros and cons to it all.
Right.
You know, a high-tech device, of course, technology can be our best friend and our worst enemy. Things do go wrong. You know, but I really think that whatever steps you can take, even if you improve somebody's ability to communicate one thing every day, you've improved their quality of life on some level. So I know I carry a certain amount of bias in this, but I don't necessarily think there is a disadvantage.
That's a wonderful place to end it. Thank you so much. This will be added to our archive on our website within a few weeks.